SCI-Arc lecture series. Tonight's lecture is by the New York-based studio Commonwealth, led by David Boira and Zoe Coombes. When I was asked to give this introduction, my first response was, who are Commonwealth? This was certainly not meant pejoratively. It was much more innocent and simply a result of my ignorance. Upon a little investigation, their work was immediately recognizable as it has been widely published and is aesthetically provocative. But it was the name that didn't stick for some reason. I guess I would have expected a slicker name attached to that kind of work, since the naming of a design practice today for the younger generations is akin to the naming of a rock band. It's less about stating a fact, ideology, or position of authority, and more about conveying a mood, a posture, or an atmosphere. There are no offices for the younger generations, and in fact, very little references to a fixed location. Indeed, the names given to these practices are scrutinized as much as the work is, and this is no exception. Commonwealth can suggest two contradictory postures. On one hand, we can understand them to be claiming their sovereignty as a group of two united by idiosyncratic interests. On the other hand, we can interpret their practice as understanding itself as part of a larger network of productive knowledge. It seems that both definitions apply. There's clearly a distinct set of aesthetic interests that are connected to a broader discipline of shared design and fabrication intelligence. So they are both a commonwealth of autonomy and dissemination. While their academic pedigree is predominantly East Coast, and even extending further east to parts of Europe, we can't hold it completely against them, for they had a brief stint here at Art Center. For the sake of argument, we'll just presume that their West Coast exposure was their saving grace. Trained as architects, their work has been focused on a scale more immediate to the body: objects, furniture, installations, floor surfaces, and other cultural artifacts. This scale has allowed them to explore the more visceral attributes of contemporary design and fabrication techniques. It is also a disciplinary strategy that, I would argue, is a covert critique on those practices that apply the same formal desires at all scales of production, which leads to another interesting contradiction found in their work. Classical ideas of organization and baroque ideas of effect. The use of symmetry, grids, proportion, and repetition are used for their economies of order, while a contemporary notion of sensuality is used for its economy of excess. These contradictions are not resolved into an aesthetics of ambiguity, but one of simultaneity. Each distinctly exists within a coherent composition of visceral desire and claims a position on what constitutes beauty, which, in their words, arguing for is the fool's game. The production of it, on the other hand, is another matter. Now, to prove me all wrong and present us with an alternative fiction of their commonwealth, please welcome David and Zoe.
Thanks, Ramiro. I think maybe we can get it across, but I think in some ways I want to say something very similar to what you just said. So maybe you should be giving a lecture. But thanks for that introduction. I'm glad that you see that. So we're really pleased to be here because it's true we did, we in some ways kind of work outside of architecture, but at least outside of the buildings, but we did go to architecture school and we were at Columbia, but we were fairly, especially at the end of our studies, really interested in what was going on at SCI-Arc and how that was different from where we were coming from. So it's a particularly good lecture for us to be invited to do. So the way of working here, I think for us always felt much more kind of material and tested. And I'm sure that has something to do with the space of being in California, the ease of working with bigger things, but it's something that in New York, it just wasn't kind of happening with this sort of digital interest to be so tested and materially. So we did come out to California. 2004, 2005.
Yeah, that's a good thing about like Art Center, but in reality the bug but bit us when we came over here to the first studio there, Hernán Diaz Alonso thought at Columbia he did this thing, he wanted to do an exchange between studios. I think he continues doing that. But at the time we came over and we got exposed to like your cool machines back there, like at the time it was like, it was really, really clean there, like it's like 2004 or something. And I even like skateboarded a lot through here and really like
friends with people who we're still in touch with.
Yeah, but I mean, so really like in reality, coming to this school was the one that set up this whole problematic way that we set up a studio where we even have toys in there and things like that. But it's basically you guys' fault is this place. So
I mean, it's all just to say that I think we've, without actually legitimately being part of this institution in any way, we've been fairly influenced by it. And it's something that we thought your way of working, what we saw here was something that we could actually take back to New York and start doing in Brooklyn, in industrialized Brooklyn. Yeah. So instead of sort of talking about tools and technology, etc., that I think we were really focused on here, I mean, I think you guys are, in some ways are really at the forefront of that here. We're going to talk about some things that are a little bit more personal and subtle. So the title of our lecture tonight, it was The Agnus Dei and the Dirt of Tomorrow. And it's maybe a bit of a subtle idea about something, a feeling that kind of drives our work, that keeps us really excited about the way that we're using the kinds of tools and ideas that I think many people in our generation are exploring. And it's maybe a little bit of a slippery idea that's not fully resolved, but I hope it's something that will kind of be a little bit more clear seeing our work. So an Agnus Dei, it's a Catholic icon. Not everybody knows what it is, but it's a Catholic icon, which is a depiction of a sheep. And it's often this very beautiful product of a little wax tablet. It's an old product. And here it's in a painting by Francisco de Zurbarán, he's part of the Spanish Baroque, and the painting was painted in 1635. And it's the Lamb of God. It's an icon, it's a symbol of the perfection of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ for humanity's sins, but it's really a little tablet of the idea of perfection. I think in terms of product design, I'm not sure that, or I suppose we're not sure that the world really needs more kind of icons of perfect order. This is a lamp that we're working on. This is a lamp that we're working on, which is maybe with an impulse of perfection, of order, that's of a very different nature than the Agnus Dei. That's something that we kind of strive for. But we also really have an interest in something that's quite different, of the dirt. It's called the Agnus Dei and the dirt of tomorrow, of a feeling where working with material experiments and the kind of anomalies that come from that, there's a kind of excess, something that's more tactile and less controlled, that's also very kind of stimulating to us, let's say. And how to kind of resolve these two impulses is something that we're always striving for, let's say. So I think, in this lecture we want to give you a sense of how that dynamic plays, personally in our relationship or marriage, but in our work. And also give you a sense of, in a basic way, who the heck we are, since we're young. So there's a scan of kind of 4 years of work.
So should I tell a little bit about Commonwealth, how it's set up? So just gonna go through real quickly, like why I keep saying this thing about you guys screwing with us and how we set up the studio. Basically, we went ahead and bought a mill, a very heavy mill, and we got so excited that we got the mill, but we didn't have space for the studio, and this thing was arriving in I think 3 weeks or something. So anyways, we started looking like in the Brooklyn area in Williamsburg, which is still pretty industrial, just like here. And we found this building that had 8 artists living in there, but they were getting kicked out because of all the violations. Anyway, we worked out a deal that we were able to clear the building and like just set up our studio. The way we set it up is that we have like, let's say the area where we actually like design or like think about all these things and work on a neat space computer. And then right at the outside, we just set up this space that at the time was particularly used just as a gallery. And obviously it was, you know, we're talking about 2006, 2007, like times of happiness and a lot of, you know, people spending money in art and things like that. So this would allow for us to continue operating the studio without having to compromise too much and just like keep being naive about projects and curiosities we have, but in a professional environment. These are some shots of like, you know, sometimes we would have like openings and cops would love it because in New York you cannot drink outside, so they would make a lot of like extra revenue, I guess, for that area of Brooklyn, because it would ticket you if you walk out with alcohol. And yeah, so we would have like this gallery area, and in the back we would have this machine, which right now is not that clean. So we would have like this area, we have this area where we're able to produce all these pieces ourselves. So we don't have to wait to send it to a fabricator. This whole idea that you guys are more aware than even us of being able to get like instant feedback from whatever you're working on. And you know, the way that we had set up the space that has allowed for like different artists just to even come in and wanted to like do like little presentations of whatever they're doing. In this case, this is Momo, which he actually did that piece that is in the back, and it actually uses like this little tiny scripts that kind of like determines how he kind of like just pastes and like draws on top of it. And this was out on the street for a month, and all these guys came over and heard him talking about it. So it's pretty nice like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think setting up the office is a 3-part endeavor: the design office and an aspect of making, and the gallery. And the gallery, which we were really running as a business for quite a few years and had quite, I think, a surprising amount of success, even though that's really not what we wanted to do. It gave us a kind of stability to allow us to start doing more experimental work, but from a business point of view, but in a also personal kind of cultural way, it really took us kind of outside of architecture and opened us up to people who didn't know where we were coming from, and a wider variety of influence that I think was really helpful for our work. And I think the influence of art maybe wasn't so unnatural. That his father was a painter, and he's a Catalan painter, and works a lot in sculpture, and you know, these lines and these impulses were, I think, maybe already inherent kind of in our relationship or in history. So we began also doing these exhibitions in the gallery that were mergers with artists. This one's by an exhibition that we did with Kenzo Minami, and we made a series of 72 tiles on a wall, and it was really a play between intense intricacy. We projected really delicate drawings into these tiles. A play between really kind of intense intricacy and something much more kind of minimal and stark. I think this sort of hyper detailing, it's and kind of hyper blankness and repetition, kind of theme that we found through there. So quickly, this was another exhibition that we did with an artist called Tropism.
Yeah. This was with Tropism. This was done with Joshua Davis. But a lot of you guys know who he is. It's like the Flash god. I mean, I don't think he even uses that term anymore, like Flash, but
he was really early to start experimenting with and scripting in Flash.
Yeah. And we basically, you know, we would work with these artists just as an excuse for us to like get involved with like different materials and just like actually produce pieces that then, you know, they could also, within the art world, art design world, could actually be also sold. So cover, let's say, just like a cost of like this type of experimentation. And obviously we just, you know, we just wanted to like play around with ideas of how we could like learn more about how to start using like ceramics with different projects. And in this case, we just developed these vases. And obviously, there were like these SLA from there, you know, produce these slit cast molds and make the pieces themselves. But also, we would like to play around a lot with like drawings and try to see how we could, through the drawings, also like figure out, instead of just like, oh, naturally you would create these cuts, to do the slit cuts in A, B, or C way. Through playing with the models, it would allow for us to know what would be parting lines, or you know, kind of stuff like that that you guys already are aware of.
But I think this was maybe like our first kind of foray of kind of working within this, you know, digital environment, and wanting to translate that outside of obvious materials, and materials that have a longer historical lineage. Let's say, thinking about plastics often have a kind of future association, and this, we went to an old porcelain factory in New Jersey, which has been making porcelain for the White House since the Lyndon Johnson administration. And this is an old studio, and to sort of take something that's in a contemporary technology, something that people think of as, you know, leading into the future, and to work with an old technology, an old studio, an old process, something that we have references of a longer lineage. I think that was sort of maybe the first project where we start, you know, to exercise that. So the end result is a series of vases in which graphics by Joshua Davis were fired into the porcelain itself. It was done with beam porcelain.
This is as a result of like doing these kinds of projects. We wanted to continue playing around with like the skill of the vase, but it's not so much that we were interested in like doing like is it a word in English? Recipient, like bowl. Yeah.
Vessel?
Yeah, like vessels or flowers and things like that, but rather the excuse that the scale like actually allowed for exploring things that would start to deal with issues of tactility that we were really into, and how did they start feeling with, you know, how do you interact with them, or how they would feel and appeal in like enclosures. And on this case, we just created 3 different vases, and all of them like using like what at this point would be like really basic different rules of modeling. It just sounds kind of ridiculous to talk about this here because you guys are pros. So, but anyways, they were in the end they're produced out of what is it?
Platinum.
Platinum and
platinum glaze and porcelain.
And anyway, so this is another project that we're kind of like would be like leading from working like with artists, like allowing for us to keep exploring into these other projects that have, you know, they start disconnecting themselves from artists themselves, but we could find like other ways of starting to using them.
Yeah, I mean those drawings are, you know, as much as there's kind of this, you can't work with undercuts on a 3-axis mill within porcelain, you sort of have the same limitations because molds have to divide. And those are the sorts of things that we were able to kind of experiment with within the gallery, within that kind of more stable model of production, and bring back into products. So these sorts of drawings are really how we're thinking of dividing these things into parts, which are obviously fairly key in working with products, these relationships.
Go ahead.
This project is something where working in a visual way, where we're given the ability to work much more just in purely visuals. It's a photographic project done with Tim Sasenti, whose video was playing as you came in. So we did the album art for Warp Records. They could get the album art, we did the album art for Warp Records. Here we made a series of objects that were photographed as part of the album art. And obviously, I think, you know, working in design school, there's always this idea of, you know, don't think only of the visuals, you've got to really think about, you know, performance issues and etc. And, you know, working within kind of photography and sets, and I mean, maybe here in Southern California, that's not such a heavy chain that you have to carry. But it was quite liberating to really try to make these images that were expressing music, which is obviously very deep. It's not a particularly clear kind of intellectual relationship that you make between music and visuals. It's something that has to be very visceral and very kind of guttural, whether these relationships work or not. So working with Timothy Senti and Michael Place, Build, graphic designer in the UK, these are kind of these exciting projects to work really, not without restraint, but really to kind of exercise this idea of excess and kind of a pure visual world.
Yeah, but it also had to do with the idea of not us having full authorship of just producing the work, but rather this whole obsession of wanting to work with artists or like people with other realms other than like what we trained, which was architecture.
What we gave is nothing, you know, compared to what was produced. This kind of working in collaboration is really exciting. Working within translation, giving your work to a photographer, you know, to be kind of turned over and reflected back. And so, I mean, maybe to get back to this kind of slippery idea that we're starting to see in our own work, you know, this book's quite interesting. This is an exhibition put together by Jasper Morrison and Fukasawa, Naoto Fukasawa, called The Supernormal. I don't know if some of you are familiar with this, but it's really, it's about product design in a very, I mean, I don't know if I want to say aesthetically minimalist, but in a very controlled, very light-handed kind of way. And it's a kind of control that we have, that kind of obsession and repulsion towards, but it's that kind of sympathy for. And it's obviously very different. This vein of product design is very different kind of sense of control, order, and perfection than the idea of this very romantic Agnus Dei tablet. I think that's kind of why we brought it in. But we're not totally kind of repulsed by that way of working. In fact, I think it's fairly important. So here's some images of some lamps that are still in production and development. So these are really prototype images, but that are to be launched.
Yeah, but unfortunately they have to be done by May. Because they're
by the end of May.
They will be launched by Matter as part of a smaller division that they have that is called Matter Made. So it's a little bit like a smaller run that has a bunch of other implications, of course. But it's going to be launched in ICFF in May in New York.
Furniture label, working with American manufacturers. Nice. But these are some pieces that we've done in the same aesthetic of the Morrison kind of cover. But I mean, they're very kind of controlled pieces, and I think it's also important to not only be able to kind of master this way of working, not only because one must be controlled, but also to amplify your kind of moments of excess. You know, if you don't have one, you can't see the other. So working with lighting is obviously like much more complex. There's like an enormous number of parts and these sorts of things, and the tolerances are very small. It's a LED tube light, and the concept with this is that there's a cold, you know, the benefit of LEDs is that they draw very little electricity, but the kind of turn off again is that they're a really cold light. So this is embedded, because they're such cool bulbs, you can really encase them, in this case in maple and in the walnut, and the light reflecting off the walls of the wood is able to warm it in a really nice way.
Well, but within the whole idea of supernormal, I mean, you should bring up the issue that the piece itself, well, the piece itself, this piece itself, it's based on, you know, like looking at that book, and maybe because of cultural and current political and economical situation, it would make us question, like, wow, we're kind of like maybe pushing it a little bit, and who knows what's going to be going on in the future. So, I don't know, we decided, okay, let's do something a little bit more simple, and we started like playing just with this kind of approach that I feel a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's like Jasper Morrison's belief of like, when he says, like, when I design anything, any object or anything, and I'm done with it, that should be the last time that it needs to be designed. And I mean, that's pretty heavy duty to make that kind of statement. So we kind of like thought, let's just try to play in the most minimal and controlled type of way and set like very like strict rules of like classical like ways of like dimensioning this thing. Well, let's work with a specific radius, and that radius has to translate for everything, for like perforations, for like a relationship of the height and the different parts. I mean, how like the cable inside would start running, is it like respecting the overall dimension? I mean, and the truth is that in the end it just became a really complex project that really gets really complicated quite quickly, even if you're trying to work in the most like basic way that you would never like consider to approach, or that your interest doesn't really lie there. But it has turned into quite a feat to complete this. When we started like thinking about this project, it was with the premise that, well, we'll make this series of lamps that in the end will end up in the economical sort of realm, which in this scene, like anything that the lamp, if it would cost below $2,000, that's considered economical. But in the end, like he was like, no, we're not gonna make it out of with a plaster base or anything. So it's just gonna be poured in me again with bronze. It's gonna be polished bronze.
I think also the tool pathing is kind of explicit in here, and it's, I guess, to get back to this idea of how we feel about this kind of theory of the supernormal. I think it's quite exciting for us to come from this digital background and see the kind of possibilities of excess and newness, but then to return and really be able to like show some kind of control is very exciting. But when we're talking about this kind of control and perfection, I mean, that debate within product design has become, a matter of like, does that wire fit in there perfectly? Can I turn this on with one stroke, as if we need more convenience in our lives or something? And it's actually very, when I think back of this idea of perfection in this little wax tablet of the Agnus Dei, it's actually a very petty conversation, for people like us with so much convenience in our life. I mean, we have indoor plumbing. I mean, we have the most convenient lives in the last, 8 million years. I mean, it's kind of hardly that, the only thing that kind of people have an instinct for, or kind of need from their objects. In some ways, we also sympathize with a need for something more. But I don't know. We're not totally repulsed by this vision either. I think it's also important. So the technical drawings. That said,
yeah, no, go ahead. I'm not large.
This is another series of furniture. So this is another series of furniture that we did called Lard, which speaks much more to the excessive, and not completely with lacking in control. But this is a painting by a Texan named Victoria Reynolds, who's a contemporary painter, but paints these very baroque images of flesh and meat, which we are maybe having more and more of an uncomfortable relationship with. And sort of taking that as inspiration, let's say, we produced a series of a table, a set of stools, and a bureau, so 3 very functional pieces of furniture. But the tables, for example, have leaves, lard-like leaves that slide in and out and allow the table to expand and contract. So there's a very controlled box, which binds these leaves of fat. And within the table, there's like a tongue sliding in and out. The bureau, the bureau, again, always a sense of this very controlled box, and within, these sort of filled with these larded surfaces.
I mean, it goes back again to this super normal, but in a weird way, we were not even thinking about it. But it's always been a little bit of like trying to argue about that, like that everybody just feels really comfortable with a piece like this. It's just kind of, it's just not saying really anything. It's not overwhelming your way of life, let's just say, and it can just blend perfectly with all your, with all your Helvetica posters and all your like really like plain.
Yeah, he's got it out for the fun.
but I mean, like for us, like, it's just exciting, the idea of like, that you open it and then you have all this really like excessive. Well, it's not like visceral in this case, but it's just like wet and it's just really in your face. But at the same time, it totally operates and works quite functionally. Like this is not totally extravagant. Like it actually works. At least we think so, right? I mean, they're really heavy. These pieces are made out of Richlite, which is, you guys probably know.
Amazing American material.
Yes, it's paper-based. It's just like pressed paper on like this very
compressed
gigantic.
under high temperature in a resin, and it mills beautifully because it has no grain, and it's kind of an ecological alternative to corian because instead of using a rock, it uses a paper base in it. Full amazing detail.
Yeah, it holds really amazing.
Heavy, beware heavy.
Very heavy. Yeah, if you drop like a piece of Richlite on the floor, you probably make a hole in the concrete. It's that kind of heavy and that kind of strong. I mean, it does. I mean, I remember dropping one in the studio, and I mean, that thing chipped, but also the floor like got injured. So I mean, I don't know, it's amazing.
Watch out, floors.
So, anyways, there's some technical drawings, like all these things. I mean, we have a little bit, not an obsession, but we really try to strive on like making, using all these sort of like formal approaches, but at the same time, we want to have it all figured out. We cannot just make it and somehow it kind of like produces some type of effect that in a photograph, let's just say photograph is rendering, but if you're able to produce a material that just through a photograph, it can convey something else. Like for whatever reason, maybe we're a little bit naive or something, but we cannot leave it at that point. We have to have it figured out. It's that kind of uncomfortability of having somebody touching these pieces and then realizing they're not working or they're not really put together. So we feel quite comfortable about like how all these things that we produce are like put together. Obviously, corners like this, like we worked out with some really amazing people we had working in the studio at the time, and you kind of have to control the surfaces, how they all come together, and have a continuum of the surfaces in the corners, which creates a bunch of other different issues. Is the large stool? You want to talk about the large stool? Yeah? Oh, this is the large stool. So you want me to just fly through it?
Yep. In fact, the places of where these, I mean, this sort of, whether the kind of excess is a kind of conceit or not, in fact, these stools, which are exactly 15 inches by 15 inches by 15 inches of this boundary, all the screws that are there to connect them into their structure, we were able to quite quickly program the way of finding where these pieces were fat enough to put a female, so what is called a threaded insert, and put the screw in there. So this idea of attaching where the fat permits is like to bring a kind of functional idea into these, let's say, excessive, more visceral surfaces. So I mean, playing with these ideas of A versus B, A and B. I mean, it's really not that clear what needs to dominate.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, fleshless. Okay, so Zoe wants to jump into like this project we're doing, but just one more project before Headspace is fleshless. This is basically a project that we're trying to complicate things even a little bit more. And this is a couple of years ago, but we really like
an architectural project.
This is probably the most. Yes, I think so. It doesn't mean that it's you can repeat it or we know how to repeat it. But basically, what we try to do is we wanted to create a floor that had some type of like patterning, but that it would actually kind of have like some relief in it, so it would feel like an old sort of like rug or something like that as you're walking through it. So we decided to use real flow. Not sure why we decided to do that. That was a nightmare. But basically, tried to figure out a way where we could actually control it to an architectural level, where we were able to like produce a tiling system, but not only that, but that we were able to control this, what it would be like this ginormous scale,
gaseous cloud.
Yeah, this ginormous files, and to actually control it to like being like super flat, but at the same time have a certain amount of tolerance for relief. So this was made out of like, I think it was like 85 tiles or something like that. And it was used for, as a space for actually like showing like artwork and like having meetings and things like that. So basically you can see here the sort of like the file just running through the space and finding a moment that it works for us, and then having to tweak it a little bit, of course, with like lattices and things like that to make it look a little bit more dramatic. And what we did is that we used this 14-ply wood. So because we were sort of like cutting not very deep into it, what it would start creating is like showing in between like the plies and the wood. And then we were going to play with like staining it, which we worked with this lady, Kathy, and she just basically works on this. She does like professional staining, and we were trying to achieve this sort of look what's the name of, just trying to think of, anyways, that it would kind of like be like see-through. It would,
well, we called it fleshless because we think it came into its own. We're playing with a 14-ply plywood, so where this relief went into a maximum of 6 millimeters, you didn't know what level of birch this thing was going to hit, and it gave a secondary material texture that you can't, as complex as real flow is, that you can't achieve just with the geometry, right? And so with the white stain, we were trying to make it really like a thin Caucasian skin, you know, where you can see the veins underneath. And so those sort of interplays between where the geometry hits the material is, you know, if we can, I mean, maybe even me more so, I tend to be more focused on the material end, and that be more focused on the geometry end. But I mean, that sort of level where you can create a geometric interface with the material is really kind of where it's at for us. So fleshless, the Caucasian floor.
There you go. Ta-da. Deep project.
Another project that's not resolved, it's just a window into Commonwealth, but it's called Headspace. It's organized by the MoMA and with Paula Antonelli, the design curator there, and
Deadline next Friday,
which we're presenting on the 26th to a critique of Chandler Burr, who, I don't know if you're familiar with him, he writes the Scent Notes in Tea Magazine. He's a man with a fiery tongue, so wish us luck. But the idea, and I think it came out of the exhibition, The Design of the Elastic Mind, was to think about design and scent, design and smell. And so we were paired with some nez, as in the French for nose, perfumers, who are coming out of International Flavors and Fragrances, IFF. So we first sort of became familiar with the world of how perfumes are made, fine fragrances. This is the booth of our perfumer. This is the lab in Hazlitt, New Jersey, where they make this stuff in volume. Dr. Bones, the chemist. It's kind of interesting, these guys, you know, they work, I mean, it seemed to be a very kind of clean clinical space, but they work by really writing out their equations out on these glasses and on the glass and mixing it behind, I don't know why his name's Dr. Bone Meal, but maybe it's the environment. And in the end, I think maybe an obvious kind of solution from us would have been to make some scented furniture. You know, we're called in as furniture designers and we're working on scent. But I think it feels a little bit gimmicky to us, and so we really want to interact with their what's called Headspace Technology, which is actually the name of the exhibition. And you know, the perfume industry began in 1630 or something in class in a kind of official way. But you know, here we are in 2010, and it's actually this amazingly complex chemical industry. But this is the sorry, this is the Headspace Technology. These are these globes that they can place on basically anything. Anything that we have around us is emitting molecules that can be smelled. And so this is taking the scent from, they have on the side of the Garden State Parkway, which is not a very romantic road in Jersey, they have a greenhouse, which is the world's largest collection of scented orchids. So this is Headspace Technology absorbing the molecules of a flower without damaging it. And from there, where's the GCMS machine? From there, it's taken to a GCMS machine, which gives a molecular breakdown of what molecules, olfactory molecules, are emanating from any piece of material. And these machines are used in detective work. You can tell where somebody's been by the scents coming off of them. So we took what was a kind of difficult material for us, but a kind of romantic one, which is 100-year-old lumber that we don't really know much about. Other than there was a fire in a building, we bought a lot of lumber, not a lot, but a lot of lumber, and we gave it to them for analysis, for their Headspace analysis, and said, really, in the kind of Louis Sullivan kind of, in a way of saying, what does this material want to be? Take this, send it through your systems of analysis, and tell us what does this smell like, and we'll design off of that. We'll make a design that embodies the smell rather than producing a scent. So, although this is maybe kind of antique lumber, it's really from the roughest back of Brooklyn. The Gowanus or the Newtown Creek is flowing through here, which is a gigantic Superfund site. But we rescued this piece of wood. They ran it through their Headspace analysis, and under corporate oath, we're not allowed to show anybody really what the results were, but they give us a graph. This is from a GCMS machine, which can tell us what percentage of molecules are kind of emanating from this. So what does a piece really smell like? But what was more interesting, because I don't know what to do with the kind of data sets. I think a lot of people are experimenting with how data sets can generate form. But there they have this kind of enormous databases that will take molecules, hydroxylimonene, limonene, and translate those into things that we think of as more subjective, more emotional. So our piece came back, and it's a very scientific process. Our piece came back as 99% masculine, 98% therapeutic, 97% harsh, chemical, aged, nostalgic, stressed, depressed, heavy.
Heavy, we hit that one pretty good.
So we really sort of looked at this piece of wood and said, what is it saying to us? How can we take this very scientific / subjective romantic data and embed it? And we decided to make a butcher block, a meat chopping board out of these blocks of wood, as something that's masculine and unfortunately nostalgic. You don't see the butcher block at Whole Foods or Seatown supermarket, let alone. So, but it was, so we're milling this butcher block out of an end grain piece, and I think it's a way of sort of taking data sets and the kind of, I think we have mixed feelings about working with the fragrance industry. I think in a lot of ways we don't need any more fragrances in our bodies and in our environment, but we really have kind of respect for just the pure kind of advancement of this science.
You signed a form that this is going to be televised, right? What you're saying.
So the risk of
liability
for only saying positive things.
They're big. They're really big.
It's quite beautiful in the way that they can take a molecular world and this very advanced science and translate it back to cultural issues that we all understand. We all understand these kind of subjective adjectives. So, clearly it comes from a digital model, but it's to be translated into something that's more cultural, more familiar. We're making it out of 3 parts, all 6 parts that come together. It's hopefully, this thing of how to kind of make sure that it's masculine. There's like a very fine line between whether this thing's going to be masculine or feminine. In fact, we're making this kind of thing that's going to be covered in liquid with a hole on the top that will be kind of 3 petals and dripping. And we really hope that it has a kind of sturdy masculine feel because it's a very slippery way of designing. But it's very much the way that the perfumers design. They, in terms of design, they have a funny world. Somebody comes to them and says, make me something that smells of red. It's been an interesting world to take part of. So this is not a complete project, but we're going to be photographing this with, with a butcher, with a cow tongue.
Lots of dead animals, even though we're mostly raw foodists, so this is going to be challenging at this point.
But apparently it's what the wood wanted to become.
Yeah.
You should always ask the brick what it wants to be, they say.
Yeah, well, the thing is that we have French interns, and they're really, visceral. He's really visceral. And he's like, oh, I want to why don't we do the, what does he call it? What is it called? Like, a still life? How does it say in French?
Nature mort.
Yeah.
Dead nature.
Like a lot of like cute dead animals all over while he like destroys them. They'll make pretty pictures. I mean, that's pretty. All right. I'm going to talk about morphiness.
This is a project that we thought was complete, but has come back and is turning into another project. It's what we call morfina, which is the Catalan word for morphine. And it's maybe something we named after a painting that David's from Barcelona, and I think, working with these kinds of, let's say, excessive forms, I think we're fairly conscious of the fact that there are cultural anxieties, at least they can say, with dealing with kind of voluptuous form. And this painting is by Santiago Rossignol, and he's, and it was, Barcelona, if you've been there, I mean, it's full of kind of expressive, voluptuous form, but it's really from a period where Barcelona was connected to the train system with a lot of textiles and had a really big boom in art and design and architecture. This painting is sort of seen as the fall of that period, and it's a painting of a this bourgeois woman spending the afternoon in bed, high on morphine, and the painting period that comes after is called Noucentisme, the new century. It was a restoration of Latin and Italian values and something much more strict, and there was a real kind of anxiety about the voluptuousness of form that kind of was crystallized maybe by that painting. And this, we were commissioned to do a set of door handles for somebody in early 2007, and we were given a lot of free rein to be quite expressive and strong in the materials, so we're going to cast them in bronze. And ironically, when we finished these pieces was in September 2007, which is, crash of Lehman Brothers, and the feeling that we'd entered a new kind of aesthetic era, and maybe this sorts of work was, debauchery in some way. So I don't know, that's where the name came from, but we worked with an old foundry in Greenpoint. Williamsburg is amazingly full of makers still. I think, we thought that maybe we needed to come to California to do it, but apparently this isn't the only place where people are still somewhat making things. But we worked with an SLA and translated that into bronze. And these are images from the foundry, which is certainly, let's say, aesthetically a kind of well, you get these pieces back and you think the whole idea is a blunder and a disaster because they come out looking like a burnt turd. But they, by the end...
And you have put like a couple $1,000 already into a project like this. And sorry, I'm going to go back, but that's why I put this picture, because I'm not... This is the first time we've seen these pieces, and it's taken like a couple of months to get this. I mean, for whatever reason, it took a long time. And she, you know, the foundry lady, she's really excited, and I mean, I'm just kind of like, what the hell's going on here? I mean, this is, yeah, should I put it on my iPhone and send the client this picture? He'll totally love it. So, I mean, but obviously this is, again, one of those projects that it was the first time dealing for us, you know, with a foundry and seeing the process, and also had to do with the idea of not understanding that, I mean, I can, you know, we can do all these things in whatever software you use, that they just look gorgeous and you can render them fantastic, but in the end, when you start interacting with the actual material, there are certain limitations as of like how much really is it become digital. So in this case, we saw that, you know, they kind of had to really like work a lot by hand to make them fantastic. Like there was a lot of like hand work, and we just didn't know that this is the actual process that goes through to making these things. So they would have to use the SLAs to kind of like look at them and make them exactly like that, which that was amazing to see the process. We really liked it. It's a lot of hard work put into making these things. In the end, you know, we thought we were going to use like some type of finish, but it started looking like those really cheesy, like vaquero kind of like belt buckles. It was like, oof, you can't do that. So I don't know, for whatever reason, it ended up going back again to being like polished. So it ended up being like this polished bronze, really heavy handles. And you know, this project kind of like has like being like revived again. And this is part of also, we couldn't like just do these pieces that we showed that were the lamps that were kind of like normal and just have them in the show, but we're really happy that the this furniture maker, he was like, well, we need to have some pieces that are more within also the language you guys have. And we were quite surprised because given the times that we're now, we were like, well, let's be really austere and these things are not appropriate and whatever. And here he goes and he asks for like this armoire that I just know it's not going to be anything below $20,000, but he's totally happy about it. And we obviously don't understand who these guys are, but some people are doing nice, they're doing well, and we're happy to deliver this work. So yeah, this is kind of like an early take. We have to really figure out how to do this armoire because these handles are really heavy. Like there's no playing around as of like, well, we'll make them out of other material. We can work with this company in Belgium that, you know, you can make SLAs that are actually made of metal and like kind of like try to make it like that. But he wants them out of bronze, so has like this really gonna do like this really thick doors. Have to figure out a lot of issues, obviously, how to like balance this monster. But these are kind of like the initial takes of like how it sits, you know. It's not just putting handles into a door, but we kind of wanted to have both pieces interacting, and we're still trying to figure out what kind of wood we want to use. At least I'm going for wood. Zoe would like to use like something that has no grain, like rich light, but that's also heavy. Anyway, that's a totally like studio discussion. But it would be nice if it's just like wood, because this market is really, let's say Upper East Siders. They kind of like really like materials and all these things, and just saying rich light, I guess it doesn't go through that
Well, and not even said in economic terms, but I think we're not, you know, we always need to be following the retail world as some kind of indicator. We're not, you know, wanting to be floating off our own in space. And I think, you know, the issue of aesthetics, and obviously there's been a kind of shift in world economies, and so how does that translate into aesthetic ideas? And I don't think it's totally going to be the end of any kind of expression. And you know, where that's going to fall, we're not sure, but I don't think it's all about the return to the austere, which I think we had some kind of anxiety that maybe that's what it would have to be. But I don't know, maybe things have to be done more creatively and in a different way, but I don't think that there's no space for the more expressive and more excessive. I think there's still space for it. And maybe we'll
this is it.
end with a project which we had a short film of it playing when you came in, but these are done in collaboration with photography Timothy Sassenti, and we made the props, the masks that these women are wearing, which, you know, we knitted these with horsehair painstakingly over a period of 30 maybe combined hours, but tried to bring these kinds of textures of natural horsehair and SLA, which is a really contemporary, inhospitable, plasticky material, bring them together. And they became part of what's still an ongoing developing film called Garden of Earthly Delights, and were part of a photographic show in Tokyo, and this came out of the Flying Lotus work that we had done for Warp Records earlier. But, you know, maybe we wanted to end with this, in part because I think, you know, making these sorts of pieces and being forced to kind of put them in things that are about, I don't know, contemporary or pop culture, that are part of the narratives that we are adapting, I think is kind of a big challenge, how to translate something very technological into something that has a longer cultural history, you know, of something as simple as storytelling, something we want to kind of get closer to making that, maybe without the same kind of historic religious connotations, but a little bit closer to making objects that are a little bit more rich, like that Agnus Dei wax tablet. And in part, I think projects like this are a stab at that. So, thanks so much for staying with us.